Hey, good afternoon. My name is Jeff Harrison, and you have arrived. Yes, it is time for Mortgage Minute. And the host of our show, yes, he's back just doing a couple little things. He's checking on a couple little notes. Some things are just happening at such a breakneck speed. And, if you're in the market for, refinance your home, buying a home, whatever it may be, when it comes to financing and loan with your home, you'll want to be here because the man with his thumb on the pulse, and maybe even in the neck, find out what's going on is Art Alvarez. Let's bring Art in. Art, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jeff. Well, thanks for that intro. That was pretty creative.
Oh,
I
it's
get my
always
thumb on
fun.
my neck here. So
Yeah, put a thumb in the neck,
yeah,
trying to get a pulse there, seeing what's
right,
going
right.
on.
Yeah.
You said off air before we started that hey, it's been a wild week or how would you say, a strange week?
Yeah, I think I said it's been an interesting week as it relates to mortgage rates. So, which of course we'll jump on that as our first subject. So,
Great. Hey, before we jump on that, let me just remind you, if you're just joining us or you're watching it in recorded later, and you have a question about anything that's come up, or maybe something that Art has not covered, but it has to do with you getting a mortgage or refinancing, or hey, you're going to get solar and you decide to put a loan on your house, is that the best way to go? These are the kind of questions you want to put in the comments or get a hold of Art. So make sure to do that because this is a live show. And, when you have live shows, you get live answers. So if you show up with a question, you go home with an answer. Let's do this, Art.
well, thanks very much, Jeff. Hello, everyone. As I mentioned, as Jeff and I were just talking, it's been an interesting week or last week in terms of mortgage rates. So let me get right into that. As you know, one of my favorite things to talk about and to refer people to is to look at the 10-year bond chart because it gives you a pretty good idea of the direction of mortgage rates. This chart here shows what's been happening over the last 5 business days, and you can kind of see that trend upward. That chart definitely has an upward trend from left to right. What that underscores is the fact that, again, late last week, last Friday, we were 10-year bond yields around 340 plus, and it's been creeping up all week. So that right now it ended today at around 3.65. So that's an indication that mortgage rates have moved in a similar direction and by a similar amount. So, and again, the way you can get an idea as to where rates are currently kind of live is go to our website. We do have a rate grid right on the homepage. And if you remember this grid from last week, I'm sure, will be able to tell that this grid now reflects a little bit higher rates. Last week we were still under 6% for a conforming 30-year fixed. Now we're a little over 6%, 15 years still in the fives. FHA VA is still in the fives, though now more in the mid to high fives when it was in low fives last week. So what's going on here? What is affecting mortgage rates this week? Well, there's a couple of things. One is that there continues to be jitters in the financial markets with regard to the ongoing federal government debt negotiations. So that's definitely been a factor. And there's all kinds of predictions that if that doesn't get resolved and we end up in a case where the U.S. goes into default, that could be horrendous for mortgage rates. I mean, the suggestions I've read could be as much as a 2% increase from where we're at now. So hopefully that gets resolved. They come to a resolution and an agreement so that we don't get into a default situation, because that would not be good news for anybody. And the other thing that I had on my bullet point here is, when there's a bearish stock market, like within the last week, we had one day where the stocks sold off by quite a bit, by several hundred points, and when that happens, all else the same, we can sometimes end up with a flow of funds where money moves out of stocks and other investments into the bond market as a haven for safety. So we saw some of that earlier in the week. And in fact, there was even a news article I read that was predicting that we're on the cusp of mortgage rates and interest rates in general starting to fall. Well, it doesn't take but a day or two for things to change. And so what's happened now, given that chart I just showed you, to undermine that narrative? Well, turns out this morning, the Dallas Federal Reserve president, in public comments, specifically indicated that current economic data does not support the Fed pausing on their strategy to raise the Fed funds rate. So, of course, what that did is the markets reacted negatively And so now the expectation of another Fed increase in June, which was previous to this morning, was predicted. Very small percentage of the market was predicting that would occur. Most of the market expected that would not occur. Well, now that's getting more in an even situation where almost half the market, so to speak, is now thinking there will be another increase because of what the Dallas Fed president said this morning. So that's an idea, or an example, I should say, of where some of this is psychological. A Fed representative, Dallas Fed president's a pretty important person. If they're suggesting the Fed's not done, well, that gets taken to heart by the financial markets. And thus, here we are. Rates have been trending up a little bit. So that's where we're at on mortgage rates. One other thing I wanted to say, beware the headlines regarding mortgage rates, because at least up until now, very often on the business news early in the morning, you read news articles in the financial markets and so forth, I see recurring reference to mortgage rates being 6.5%, 7%. And of course, as you know, in my rate updates over the last several weeks, I've been pointing out we've actually been a lot better than that. Not so much this week, but again, I would urge beware the headlines as it relates to mortgage rates. If you want to get a truer picture of where mortgage rates are in terms of live, just go to our website anytime. We try to keep that rate grid updated, and that way you can get a better idea where mortgage rates are at. So with that, I want to go on to another. This is actual mortgage product I want to talk about, and it's pretty interesting. And the reason is because it's a mortgage that you wouldn't expect to hear about these days. And of course, I put up here community mortgage, no employment, no income, no kidding. So what does that mean? Does that mean it's possible to get mortgage financing without a job and without income? Well, guess what? The answer is yes, that is possible. I do have a program available now that's called a community mortgage. And here's what it features. When you submit an application, no employment or income from your employment is disclosed on the application. It's left blank. The other features of the program are pretty interesting as well. You don't have any seasoning for bankruptcy. The loan amount available can be up to $3 million with a 20% down payment, and you only need a credit score of 700. That is pretty aggressive in terms of available terms for this kind of loan. Some of the other features include you can actually have a minimum credit score of 640 and still get a loan at 65% loan to value. That's pretty aggressive as well. So again, this reflects some flexibility with the program. No bankruptcy seasoning, as I mentioned, and this is available for both primary and second homes. And the important distinction on second homes is there's no bump in the rate just because it's a second home, as is the case with a conforming loan. So that's another pretty attractive feature. And then get this, the down payment, all closing costs can be from gift funds. It doesn't have to be any of your own money. Now, typically gift funds have to be from another family member, but the point is all of your down payment and closing cost money can be provided through gift funds. And then the last thing is this loan has no prepayment penalty. So pretty interesting program. And again, why would this be occurring? Because we thought we had heard that after the big recession of 2008 and the real estate and mortgage market meltdown, that it was these kinds of loans, these no income, stated income, no ratio loans, which is essentially what this is. There is no debt ratio calculated. Didn't that bring on the Great Depression that we had or Great Recession we had in 2008? Well, in this case, maybe not. A couple things about well, first of all, who would use this kind of loan? It's actually a pretty good loan for certain situations. For example, you're self-employed or small business owner, have trouble documenting your income through the normal sources of tax returns and so forth. You may have volatile or irregular employment. Your employment history may not support being able to get a conforming loan. You may be retired with minimal to no income, but maybe you have a lot of assets. You could be a seasonal or gig worker where, again, your income stability is in question and you can't meet conforming underwriting guidelines. You may be an owner or an employee of a cash business. You could be in the midst of changing your job, not just in terms of the same line of work, but maybe a whole different industry where that change could be problematic in getting approved for a conforming loan. You may need this because of transitioning from recent health, family, or other life events, such as a divorce. You can also, by the way, get cash equity. This program is available up to 70% loan to value for a cash out refinance, again, without disclosing your employment or your income. Now, why would this even be available? Well, it turns out the lender that we have for this program is certified as a community development financial institution. What that allows this lender to do is provide financing for low-income borrowers and borrowers who are not able to be served by the existing conforming loan programs. And so therefore, this program does not require that we follow the ability to repay, the ATR rules that were put in place after 2008, where you have to document your income and meet a debt ratio. Because this is being provided by a community development financial institution, those requirements are waived, and that's what allows this program to be made available. So for certain situations, I think this is a great alternative for somebody who needs to get a loan fast, who may not be able to go through the extensive documentation criteria and calculating debt ratios and so forth. This would be a great alternative. Now, of course, the rate's higher. This is not, a loan that's going to, provide you financing at, 6 or 6.5%. The rate is going to be higher. It's going to be in the high single digits. But for the right circumstance, this is a great viable option, and I just want you to be aware of it. If you want any more information, of course, reach out to me. So then the next thing I want to talk about, and it's kind of related, is, what the heck is a non-QM loan? Well, a non-QM loan is, non-QM, by the way, is referred to as a non-qualified mortgage. Well, what does that mean? Well, most mortgages that are made today are conforming loans, and they have to conform to qualified mortgage criteria. Again, this was all established after 2008, where we had to meet ability to repay guidelines and calculate debt ratios based on verifiable income. So these programs, these non-QM programs, they are intended to serve borrowers who do not meet agency qualified mortgage guidelines. Now, I want to point out quickly, this is not to say that these are subprime mortgages, because they're not. This doesn't mean if you've got a 540 credit score that this type of loan is going to be an option for you. Most of these non-QM loans don't go anywhere near that low of a level in credit score for eligibility. So these are not the same as the old-time subprime mortgages for people with just bad credit. This is really more served for people who have pretty decent credit to good credit, but they aren't able to meet the agency criteria, the QM guidelines for documenting income and calculating a debt ratio. So most of these non-QM loans, their whole focus is to provide financing options based on reduced documentation requirements. And in that regard, the reduced documentation is predominantly based on income or employment, but mostly income. What that also suggests is that assets, liquid assets, are important. Those definitely have to be verified, and we have to establish that the borrower is going to have not only enough to close, but enough in reserve post-closing in order to be eligible for the program. Now, again, what's the trade-off with this kind of loan? Similar to that community mortgage, you're going to have a higher rate and fees compared to an agency loan. But again, I would argue that that trade-off in terms of the higher rate and fees in many cases is well worth it. So let me go in the next slide. I just want to show you just a kind of a short list of what kind of non-QM loans are available. And some of them are pretty interesting. And of course, as we like to do in the mortgage business, I'll start off with the first one. It's an acronym. It's Debt Service Coverage Ratio, DSCR. Now, what does that entail? Well, this is predominantly made, or this is a loan that was designed for people who are either own or going to purchase rental property, and they want to be qualified without having to go through the trouble of documenting income, providing tax returns, calculating a debt ratio. They either don't want to do that, or they know that if they do, they won't get approved. So with this program, we're able to qualify borrowers strictly on the relationship between the proposed housing expense for the rental property you're purchasing based on the loan amount you want versus the projected net rental income that is determined by the appraisal. And it's just the relationship of those two numbers. If it's even or a positive cash flow, that is all you really need to get this type of loan, get an approval on this type of loan. So then the next one that non-QM loans offer is loans for I-10 borrowers. Well, what's I-10? That's individual taxpayer identification number. So these are a great option for borrowers who only have an I-10 number. They don't have a Social Security number. They're essentially not they're not a documented resident other than they have an I-10 number. So non-QM loans can serve that segment of the market. And that, by the way, though, can include full documentation. Now, in this case, you can, if you want, and if you're able to, document your income through pay stubs and W-2s and tax returns. That's certainly okay. But this program allows you, as that type of borrower, to get financing where you wouldn't be eligible for if you were a Fannie Mae or looking to get a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac conforming loan. Then the other bucket, we'll call it, for non-QM loans that's pretty popular is loans for foreign national borrowers. Now, in my market here in Palm Springs, but true in other markets, throughout California and other states, foreign national borrowers are generally, of course, borrowers who don't have legal residency in the U.S., but they're interested in buying property in the U.S., usually a second home or a rental property. So non-QM loans serve that segment of the market as well. And in most cases, some of this overlaps where, in fact, I just quoted out a purchase loan for a Canadian foreign national borrower. He's actually a chiropractic doctor up in Canada, and he's looking to purchase a rental property here in my local market. And so we are offering him a foreign national loan that incorporates the DSCR approach for qualifying him for the loan. So there's another example of how non-QM serves the underserved borrowers. The next one is asset depletion. This is where we can calculate a presumed income based on how much liquid assets the borrower has in the bank. So this is for people who have limited or undocumentable income, like from employment and so forth, but they have significant assets, liquid assets, where we can calculate an assumed monthly income for qualifying purposes in order to qualify based on debt ratio. Then the next one is 12 and 24-month bank statement loans. These loans are very popular in the non-QM segment. This is where we qualify a borrower based on not their tax returns, not pay stubs, not W-2s, but instead based on getting 12 to 24 months of their bank statements, either personal or business, and then calculating a monthly deposit amount average that is used as income. And if it's a business account, then we have to take an assumed haircut for a business expense based on the type of business that it is. But this is a very popular and very effective way to get borrowers approved when they can't document their income, and in particular, if they're a business owner where they need to be able to still get that loan. And then the next one is a second chance. This is a loan where the borrower can get financing where they don't meet the required wait periods for certain adverse events like bankruptcy, foreclosure, short sale, and so forth. So this option provides a borrower who maybe had a recent bankruptcy or maybe had a foreclosure within a period of time that's less than what the federal agencies, Fannie and Freddie, require to have a lapse between when it occurred to now. This program provides loan mortgage financing for those borrowers in that particular situation. And then the last one I want to mention is Prime and Prime Plus. This one is essentially a jumbo product where you can go full doc, use bank statements, use DSCR, use asset depletion, but it also allows for getting jumbo financing up to 90% of the value of the home on a purchase transaction. So that means you need a loan amount over $726,200, and you need a very high loan to value, and you may have trouble documenting income. Non-QM loans can serve a really good purpose in that regard. And one other thing that I didn't put on this that are also features with non-QM loans is we can get borrowers approved with just a P&L or just using their 1099s or just getting a verification of employment form from their employer. So just keep in mind that there's this whole basket of alternatives. So if you or anyone you know, or if you're a realtor and you've got a client who's going to be having trouble qualifying for a conforming loan, this is a great option. We can offer any of these, and they can be very effective in the right circumstance. And in the future weeks, I think what we're going to do here is probably highlight some of these individual programs just to give you some more information. So that's the non-QM world. at least your introduction, so that you have a better idea of what's out there despite or beyond just the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, VA, and jumbo loans. So there's a lot of choices, a lot of ways to get people financed and get them into homes. So now I want to go ahead and go into last week's closing question. When we finished the episode last week, I left you with a question. And the question was, is it possible for a borrower to purchase a rental property with less than a 5% down payment? Well, as it turns out, and of course, you're probably getting to realize I tend to like trick questions. The answer is yes, this is possible. Now, how is it possible? Well, it's possible if the borrower is purchasing a 2 to 4 unit property. So that's a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex, and they're willing to live in one of the units. Now that's, certainly unusual, but it does happen. And if that borrower is willing and interested in buying a 2 to 4 unit property and living in one of the units, and by the way, even if they're a first-time home buyer, get that. You can actually potentially finance the purchase of a 2 to 4 unit property, get it with a minimal down payment as long as you live in one of the units, even though you're a first-time home buyer. Well, what program allows us to do this? Well, one of my favorite programs, as you probably found out, FHA. FHA, believe it or not, will allow financing up to 96.5% of the value of the property if it's a 2 to 4 unit property. You only need a minimum credit score of 580. And if you live in one of the units, you can get an FHA loan with only a 3.5% down payment. Now, in terms of what kind of loan amount you can get under this scenario, well, that varies by county. As you may know, FHA loans, just like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac conforming loans, the maximum loan amount available will vary by county. So let me pull up a chart here where I can show you what kind of loan amounts we're talking about. And I'm just using some counties here in my local market. I've got Riverside, San Bernardino, San Diego, and LA Orange County. And you can see there how the maximum loan amounts differ by county. For a duplex, in my county, $824,450. You can go to LA and Orange County, and it's almost $1.4 million. Then, of course, you can see the numbers for loan amount for the 3 and 4 unit as well. Again, LA and Orange County, a 4-unit, property can be purchased using an FHA loan with a 3.5% down payment. Imagine that, over $2 million, almost $2.1 million property that can be acquired with a 3.5% down payment, as long as the borrower lives in one of the units. Now, would these be difficult to qualify for? Well, to some degree, because obviously if you think about these kind of price levels with such a small down payment, the monthly principal and interest, taxes, and insurance is going to be pretty high. So, of course, you have to qualify for that in terms of calculating a debt ratio. FHA is a qualified mortgage. So will most borrowers have enough income to qualify for these price levels with a 3.5% down payment? Not everyone. However, one benefit to know about buying a 2 to 4 unit property, and this is true even when you're going with an FHA loan and you're going to live in one of the units, is we get to use projected rental income from the remaining units that you're going to have occupied by tenants, not the one you're living in, but the other units. And that can be the amount we can use per unit can be determined by a addendum to the appraisal that includes a survey of market rents in the area, and the appraiser declares what the market rent is for each of the units. So we can use that as qualifying income, even if the units themselves are not actually occupied at the time it's being acquired. So this is a good option, not used very often. One thing that occurs to me, and I've talked to people about it before, let's say you're a family where you've got, a son or daughter and they're adults and want to buy their first home. This might be a great way to, as parents, maybe with a son and daughter, go out and look for a duplex, be able to buy it with a minimum down payment, have their child live in one of the units. They can kind of, in a sense, almost manage the other tenant. And maybe over time, if a year or 2 or 3, at that point, maybe the child's ready to move up, get another property of their own where they're not living with their tenant. And then they can still keep that 2-unit property in the family, rent out the other unit. And here you are, you're starting to develop a portfolio of rental real estate. Even if you're a young buyer, maybe with the help of your parents. And then you, like I said, move on and get another primary home for yourself. And over time, you're starting to develop a real estate portfolio. So that can be a pretty good way, kind of a neat way to take advantage of this little nugget in the FHA guidelines. So keep this in mind. It's not well known, but I thought it would be helpful for you to be able to understand that that's a possible option. And in fact, here at the bottom of the slide, you'll notice that at the time I prepared this, which was actually yesterday, a 0-point rate of 5.5% is available with a credit score as low as 660. And again, the minimum credit score for this scenario can be as low as 580. And again, as I mentioned, projected rental income from remaining units can be used for qualifying as determined by the appraisal. So any questions on that? If you want to see any numbers, again, contact me and I'll be happy to show you the numbers through a itemized detailed loan worksheet. So with that, I want to go ahead and go to this week's closing question. And that has to do with a scenario that we run into from time to time. And here's the question. Can a borrower who is relocating to a new city because of a job offer be able to close on the purchase of a home before actually starting the job? Interesting question, right? We're actually suggesting, can you purchase or finance the purchase of a home and close that purchase based on starting a new job in the city you're purchasing in, but you haven't started the job yet? So that'll, I'm sure, give you some food for thought. Next week, we'll discuss the answer to that. So tune in next week where we will have the answer on this question, and it'll be on the house. So with that, Jeff, back to you for any questions we might have.
Art, what a great show. A lot of good information. These the loans that, to me, it feels like, being somebody who was a real estate investor back in the 02, 03, 05 era, it feels like some of this stuff is coming back. You're saying they're not quite the same.
Well, they're not quite the same for a couple of reasons. Number one, on the loan product side, while lower documentation loans have kind of creeped into the industry, they're not the same as what they were 15 plus years ago. Back then I can remember, and I remember thinking at the time this was not rational lending, but the agencies and all the financial markets all seem to be supporting these options. It used to be in 2005, 2006, I could close a loan package that would be 100% financing with a first and second mortgage combo. We used to call it a piggyback. In the old days, you could do a piggyback, but maybe only up to 90%, maybe 95% total loan to value. But in the early to mid 2000s, we could do an 80-20, zero down payment, stated income, not verifying income, and with not the greatest credit score. And the whole idea was that was even available for a W-2 borrower.
Wow.
But if you think about it, why would a W-2 borrower be allowed to state their income and not prove it? That lends itself to what? Well, maybe the stated income they put on the application didn't quite correlate to reality. At the time, the industry's answer to that was, oh, don't worry. Based on job description or line of work, we have resources where we can look up what the average income is for a borrower who's a school teacher. And so that way we can cross-check that to make sure they're not lying to us. But frankly, that really didn't get applied as much as it should. In fact, to the point where I actually had a deal real quick where a sales agent in a new home community brought to me a borrower, husband and wife, both in the military, active military. And they wouldn't qualify based on their income. They wanted to go stated income, 80-20, no down payment. I actually called my lender and said, hey, look, I'm not comfortable doing this. They're going to state their income, but they're in the military. If you're going to kind of look up what their income should be based on their line of work, that's easily researched, because you can just pull up the pay grade and find out if they're an E5 or E6, what it is. And if it doesn't match up to their application, you're probably going to turn it down. Well, my account executive with that lender at the time said, no, don't worry about it. Send it in. So we did, and it got approved.
Oh, my gosh.
So the point is, there just wasn't enough focus on really following through the underwriting steps that were necessary. So that's a big part of it. These lower documentation loans have come back to a degree, but certainly not at a very high loan to value that we saw before. And that's important because that way the borrower is starting off with some equity. And then the other thing is we're just not seeing the reduction in home values that we saw 15 years ago. And that's going to help protect some of these borrowers who need this kind of financing. So,
Do you still see a lot of pressure out there on offers where they're getting multiple offers, and as you say, the prices are staying high, and inventory is still relatively low, is it not?
inventory is still relatively low. There's been a little bit of a adjustment downward in home values, but not a lot, in part mostly because inventory levels have still not come back to normal. We're not hearing nearly as much stories of, and I'm not seeing in any of the transactions I'm working on, where you've got a whole bunch of offers and going over list price and so forth. That we're not seeing nearly as much of. It happens from time to time, but it's only little pockets and usually a unique situation or unique property that's maybe priced very well. But overall, that frenzy of 20 offers and how much over list you have to go to get it, that seems to have subsided quite a bit. I think really now we have more of an issue of homeowners are still standing back and not really willing to put their home on the market because they don't want to face that increase in a 3% rate to over 6. And so because of that, at the same time, home buyers, there's not a lot of inventory for them to choose from. They're dealing with these higher mortgage rates, and so they're not quite as motivated, and they're kind of hanging back too because of the feeling, the belief that mortgage rates are going to fall, and so they want to wait for that to happen. My only concern is what if that doesn't? We'll be kind of running in place here for a while, and that could be the case.
Are we seeing a lot of as we look around here in the Coachella Valley, I see a lot of multifamily being built, apartment buildings and condos and things of that nature where there are going to be rental properties. Is that going to be the penicillin, if you will, for these people that are saying, hey, we're young, we're married, or we're just wanting to buy a place, but there's nothing to do, so they're going to be living in a multifamily type of dwelling?
Well, it certainly kind of looks that way. Although in my mind, I wish that more folks would realize that maybe they should look into the other options, like making sure that purchasing a home, even with a minimal down payment, is really off the table. Because so often I hear about folks who are, living in multifamily rental property type of a home. And when you hear about some of the rents they're paying, they're really up there. And in my point of view, with some of those folks, I'd love to be able to show them, okay, if you're paying, I'm hearing stories like $2,800 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment.
Yeah.
My word, I know prices are up. I know rates are up, but there are some solutions out there to maybe skip that, scrape up some down payment money, even if it's only 3 or 3.5%, or depending on where the property is located, USDA is still 100% financing, and look at a purchase of a home as an alternative. These rents are still very high, and I think that makes them more comparable to the housing expense on financing a purchase rather than just resorting to and giving up on owning a home and just renting. So
I think that's great advice. I'd love to see you do some numbers against, what's the average, because I know you take care of all of California.
right.
You're talking about Southern California. It's only going to get more expensive for rents because, looking at that chart you showed us earlier, what the loan amounts were is almost double in, Orange County or LA versus Riverside and San Bernardino. So
Right.
obviously it's more expensive. So it'd be interesting to say, hey, if you're paying this, you could really have this much buying power. Maybe it's still time to jump in there, knowing that now you're owning a property, right?
Right, exactly. And the other thing too is, as prospective buyers are sort of gauging things and on the sidelines, waiting for rates to fall, waiting for home prices to fall. Even though I think at some level, mortgage rates will eventually fall. We just don't know when. I mean, that could be a few months, it could be a couple of years. But in the meantime, you have to really wonder about the real estate side of things. I mean, home values have moderated a little bit. It doesn't look like they're going to moderate downward a lot. Foreclosures are next to nothing. That's going to, again, support home values and keep them from falling dramatically. Then you start to wonder, if you wait too much longer, are you missing an opportunity to grab home ownership now and then be able to write up that future appreciation that very well may occur since home prices have not really fallen much and don't look like they're going to. So.
It almost sounds like a scenario where people are trying to guess when to buy a stock, and you either miss it or you don't. Instead of just continually investing over time, and it goes up, it goes down, but over time you have this law of averages that you're going to win. I'd love for you to talk more about that.
Yeah, I think we talked about that. I touched on it in one of our videos recently where I pointed out, trying to time the market is almost never a good idea. In my opinion, you're better off if home ownership is in your future, and if you'd like to get to that point sooner than later, then pursue that based on your current needs and conditions and figure out what you can do, because putting it off because you think you're going to time the market and know when to strike, and more often than not, that's going to be a frustrating process.
I'd love for you to, I know you already have next week's question put together, but I'd love for you to talk about, hey, some of the factors that someone should consider if they're a renter or they're a homeowner. What's the true cost of this? The things that sometimes people don't think of. Here are the other benefits that you have of being a homeowner that actually makes your home ownership cost less than that of let's use that $2,800, rental property.
Right. No, that's a good point. We'll certainly do that, because there are some definite, distinct, pros and cons to both approaches. And I don't think people are really educated enough on all of that in order to make the best informed decision.
Yeah. Well, Art, thank you so much again for Mortgage Minute. And just for those of you watching again live, please put questions in the comments. And we've answered most of those that were in there. And then also on the screen, you see MortgageWorks. That's Art's company. He's been doing this mortgage business for 42 years, I believe. Isn't that right, Art?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's nothing that he hasn't seen. And I know when we first started this and we had conversations about the 3-2-1 buy down, there were some people out there that had been in the business for 10 years, which you think is a long time, never heard of it because it wasn't something they needed. Art is on the edge of that. There's more tools than he has in his toolbox than most people have at Mr. Goodwrench. So you want to make sure to check him out. You can get a hold of Art if you call his office at 760-883-5700, or again, you can call him on his red hotline. We like to call it the bat phone. 714-612-9035, his cell phone number. And of course, you can always go to mwloan.com to check out what's happening with the rates. He keeps those up to date all the time. And just give Art an email at art@mwloan.com. Make sure to join us every Thursday from 2 to 2:30. And Art already has cutting edge information of what's going on in the mortgage business. The thing that I love today, Art, and I'll let you go with this, is that young couple who's thinking, hey, maybe I can't really justify buying a home on my own, but I can get a multifamily dwelling and not only have my own place, but then some of those other units pay for me to live there and kind of get my feet wet in this process. So I love that idea.
Yep. Yeah, it's a great idea. And I encourage people to look into it further if they have interest in that. So, yeah.
Art, have a great weekend. Again, thank you so much. And we'll keep an eye on that. By the way, one question I have to ask you. This is one thing I have shot up on my page. We are at that point where the debt ceiling is having an effect. That, if somebody puts up a white flag, you got differences. If they put up a green flag, you got differences. What's your take on that? Are we gonna meet that debt ceiling?
I think so. My view of this is that, as is often the case, it seems like the politicians get into this back and forth last minute, midnight negotiations, and then more often than not, lo and behold, they come up with a deal. Now, there's some observers in the financial markets are worrying about back in 2011, where the country did, briefly go into default. And so they're kind of pointing at that this could happen again. I suspect not. I think they'll come out with a 11th hour last minute deal. I'd like to believe if they do, that should be generally favorable for the markets, both the stock and the bond market. And if so, then we should be relatively okay in terms of mortgage rates remaining fairly stable in this current trading range. We'll have to see how the news goes the next week or two in terms of this now increased belief the Fed's going to raise Fed funds again just because of the Dallas Fed comment. So we'll see how that plays out over the next couple of weeks.
Fantastic. Well, they could use a dose of, hey, stop following those headlines,
Right,
and
right, exactly. Because that's
let's
what's
get the
going on
job.
today in particular was following the headline. Yeah.
Yeah, let's get the job done. Art,
Yeah.
have a great week. And again, make sure to get a hold of Art at MortgageWorks. You've got his information on the screen there. And again, make sure that line is on your speed dial if you have questions about mortgages. Thank you so much, Art. Have a great week.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And again, feel free to contact me anytime you need any help. And remember, at MortgageWorks, we have the answers and they're on the house. Have a good day.